Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cured Collective podcast, Cured Collective YouTube series. We appreciate you joining us again. Those of you that have tuned into the initial 4 YouTube videos, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing them. We appreciate you. As we have mentioned in several of the episodes already, if you learn something, if you enjoy something, if something sparks a conversation for yourself, please share the podcast. Please share the YouTube channel. We want to get more and more people involved in our conversations. And by sharing the videos, sharing the podcast, we can expand our mission and hopefully help as many people as possible. I am flying solo today, as you can see. As you might be able to tell from my voice, I'm a bit nasally. This last week, COVID has come through our entire house. Lauren is out today. She's doing much better, but she's going to be out for the episode today and hanging with Ember. I am on the up. I'm about 7 days into it, and it was a little worse than I expected it to be. And I actually just threw up a post today on Instagram, and it sparked my desire to record this specific video. And today I want to talk about risk and risk analysis and your ability to navigate life based on your ability to understand and analyze risk and then become risk tolerant. So to start, I want to first say that I truly think that the concept of risk analysis and just the teaching of the ability to analyze risk, I think it's completely absent. I believe that it is something so crucial to developing the life in which you want that we need to make a change, and it's completely absent. So where does this start? Is this a skill that we learn as kids? Is this something that's taught in school? It's not. And as myself, an engineer, a former engineer, I have to say that some risk was some idea or concept of risk was instilled in our ability to design and solve problems and develop structures, develop systems. Much of the time when you are designing something, you buy down your risk and you put factors of safety on your design. That's something that you do as an engineer. But the way that pours out into our day-to-day life needs to be understood. And I think that if you can analyze risk properly and develop a confidence within yourself, then you can really achieve anything that you want in life, because it's based off of, oh, this is about this risky, and I'm confident in my ability to overcome this difficult situation, and I will be able to get this much further in life because I took a risk. So to take a couple steps back before we dive in further, I want to share what risk has looked like in my life. So I grew up very risk adverse, meaning taking risks was not something that I was necessarily taught to do. And it was to no fault of my parents. It was to no fault of the way I was raised. It was simply the way in which the environment in which I grew up. So to give you a little insight into my family life, I grew up as a child of a father who flew airplanes for United Airlines. And so my dad was responsible for hundreds and hundreds of people flying over the ocean to foreign countries internationally, and really just all over the world. And his job was to get people there safely, right? That's a huge and massive responsibility, and he has to buy down all risk at all times. When they're doing their pre-flight checks, when they're understanding the mechanical, when they're understanding the software, when they're understanding everything that goes into getting from point A to point B in a jumbo airliner that's carrying hundreds of people. There's risk involved, right? So my dad always had his checks and balances, making sure that this was done right and we did that and we checked this box and here's the checklist. And that's just literally how he operated. That's how he was supposed to operate. And that poured into our day-to-day life. So from as long as I can remember up until when I went into college, I was very risk adverse. Now, were there times in my life through sports and through decisions of my own and people that I surrounded myself with that I took risks? Yes, absolutely. But I was more or less conditioned to be risk adverse. And as I said, it was to no fault of my parents. Then I go to college and I start studying engineering. And as I mentioned in engineering, much of the time when you are designing as an engineer, you understand loads at which a beam will fail or stresses at which some type of a system that you're designing will fail. That's how you design as an engineer. You say, okay, well, this beam or this joint can handle this much weight or this many uh, uh, repetitions or cycles. What's the cycle life of this system? And when you understand what those limits are, you then design with a factor of safety, whether it be 2, 3, 4, dependent on what the system is trying to do. And in engineering, that is how you ensure things don't fail. And that surrounds us in every piece of our day-to-day life, in designing a house and how much the floor is supposed to load and how much load the floor is supposed to be able to carry, and driving a car. And then, of course, it happened in my professional career as an engineer when I worked at Lockheed Martin. When we were designing a system, a spacecraft for unmanned space flight, factors of safety that you utilized were less than the factors of safeties that would be used when it became a human-rated space flight. And so that was really just this continuation of the way I grew up. My dad as a pilot, and then myself as an engineer, and then working for a company that literally had the tagline 100% mission success. If you have the saying or tagline 100% mission success, well, then that means that you're buying down all of your risk. And everything that you do in your design is an understanding of how much risk exists and how you are going to avoid the risk and make sure that your mission doesn't fail. So that's how I grew up. And when we talk about risk, it's also very important to understand the difference of relative risk versus absolute risk. And I pulled up this article because I thought it was a great example of what we're talking about when we're saying relative risk versus absolute risk. So this article says absolute numbers matter, and that's it. They provide readers with enough information to determine the true size of the benefit. So in more detail, they're talking about a specific drug here. And in this study, it says if the 5-year risk for heart attack is 2 in 100, 2%, in a group of patients treated conventionally, and 1 in 100, 1% in patients treated with the new drug, the absolute difference is derived by simply subtracting the two risks. So 2% versus the group of patients treated conventionally, 1% with the group of patients treated with a specific drug. So the difference between the two is 2% minus 1%. So there's an absolute difference between the two. And if you looked at the difference between the two to go from 2% to 1%, that's a 50% reduction. So the relative difference between a patient being treated this way, conventionally or with this specific drug, is a 50% risk reduction, but the absolute risk is 2 in 100 or 1 in 100. So when we talk about risk, we need to make sure that we're talking about that we understand relative versus absolute. And there's a massive difference because when I say, well, there's a 50% reduction in risk, you're like, wow, that's a lot. But when I say that went from 2% to 1%, you go, oh, well, that's not really much of a difference. It's the same thing for everything that's going on in our world. And that's why this, my post that I put up on Instagram today sparked my desire to do this podcast, because I was talking about the fact that I got COVID. I was talking about the fact that we did not make a decision to take the vaccine, and it was based on our analysis of absolute risk. Well, we knew that we were going to get it, and we also knew that we've taken very good care of ourselves and that we are confident that we are going to make it through to the other side, because the absolute risk of dying from COVID is really, 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 really low. Now, when you talk about your risk of getting it, well, the risk is high. It's almost like everybody's going to get it. But if you add in the idea of comorbidities, well, then your relative risk to somebody that's taken very good care of themselves is going to be higher if you have a bunch of comorbidities, and you could potentially end up in the hospital. So when we talk about risk, we have to have this all-encompassing view of what risk really is and what is the absolute risk, not just the relative risk, because we're talking about something that's so, we're just so narrow focused when we're just talking about relative risk. We have to understand absolute risk. I was listening to a recent podcast with Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan, and Ben was saying that our society needs to be able to look at individuals that take risks and reward them differently. Because most of the time, when somebody takes a risk, whether it be starting a business, whether it be getting married, whether it be having kids, the risk and reward profile, especially when it comes to business, but everything else that I just mentioned is also pertinent. The risk reward profile needs to be considered. Like, that person risked a lot. This person achieved X amount in their life, and what did they do to get there? Well, they risked everything. They gave up everything that they had. They in the concept of a marriage, when you get married or when you have kids, you literally make a decision to enter into a union that is foundationally grounded in the idea and concept that regardless of what happens in this life, we are going to do whatever it takes to make this work. And if you get married at 20, if you get married at 25, if you get married at 30, and you live to 80, it's 50, 60 years. So you're betting on yourself and your ability to do whatever it takes to build a life and a family and an environment that is going to be committed to making things work, even though you know that the person that you are today, when you first get married or when you first have a child, is not the person that you are going to be or that your spouse is going to be in 20, 30 years from now, but you are betting on your ability and your spouse's ability to do whatever it takes to create the environment, to raise healthy children and build a loving and healthy relationship, even when it gets really hard. It's very, very risky to get married. It's very risky to have kids. It's very risky to start a business. It's important to note that when you step in a car, your risk of dying, or your chances of dying when you step in a car, are 1 out of 107. Yet every single day you step in your car and you don't think twice about the risk. Why is that? Well, it's because you are confident that you have done enough to be able to drive the car from point A to point B safely, and the chances of somebody running into you or the chances of somebody else making out making a mistake, well, they're always there. But you decided that you are going to take the risk every single day. 1 in 107. That's from the National Safety Council. Same goes for business. When you start a business, you're betting on yourself and your ability to do whatever it takes to become successful, regardless of the situation, no matter what. Here's some stats with business. 20% of businesses, so 1 in 5, fail in the first year. 50% of businesses, so 1 in 2, fail in the first 5 years. And of those that survive, if you were to make it to 10 years, or if we're measuring at 10 years rather, 33% of businesses survive. So that's saying 67% chance that if you start a business, within 10 years, it's going to fail. 2 in 3. But if you make the decision to start a business, the reward can be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, X the person and the income and the impact and the network and everything of that many times greater than not making the decision to take the leap, to take the risk. So what I'm trying to say here is that risk analysis is truly everything. We are living in the world right now where it's very clear what your risk of getting COVID is and what the chances of dying are. You can look it up on the CDC. I'm not going to sit here and ramble off those numbers, but I will tell you that it's very unlikely that you are going to die from COVID. It's very likely that you might get COVID at some point. The problem with much of our world is we can't actually, and we aren't actually doing the risk analysis. And so many people wonder why they can't get out of a certain place in their life, or they just can't seem to start a business or actually create the life that they want. Can you compare the two and understand why this might be the case? Well, 1 in 2 businesses in the first 5 years are going to fail. Are you going to die if your business fails? No, but it seems like it. I'll tell you that. It seems like it. It seems like on the other edge, on the other end of the business not existing, of us running out of cash, of us not being able to make any sales, it feels like death. It looks like death, but is it death? No. And so for me, I had to recognize that I could make a decision based on what I believed of myself to be in this world and of what I wanted to create in this life, even though I grew up in a very risk-adverse environment. And all the messages outside were saying, well, look at how risky it is. You're going to let go of this engineering degree, and the benefits and the amazing job that you have, and what are you going to do? Well, I bet on myself, even knowing that 1 in 5, I have a 1 in 5 chance of failing in the first year. I got very close to failing multiple times. 1 in 2 in the first 5 years. We're about 4.5 years old yet, and we still haven't failed. Because I bet on myself and I'm confident in myself. And so my risk analysis and my risk tolerance is everything. That's why entrepreneurs are people in this world that we have so much to learn from. Because even though it is that risky to start a business, entrepreneurs step out on the edge every single day and they bet on themselves and they bet on their ability to do literally whatever it takes. I think we need to start teaching more and more risk analysis and risk tolerance and our ability to build fortitude and resilience when we put ourselves in difficult situations and we do struggle and we do trip and we do fall and we do fail momentarily. We have to teach our future generations that it's okay to do that. Actually, you have to do that. You have to do that to become better and better at what it is you want to do in life. Because if you don't, you're never going to know what it feels like. If you don't try, you're never going to know what it feels like to feel the shitty suckiness of going through a difficult situation and maybe failing momentarily, but still getting back up on your feet and accomplishing something much greater than you could have ever imagined because you stuck to it. And you didn't care about the fact that, okay, this is what the risks are. I analyzed the risks, and then I was still confident in my ability to make it through. The people that tend to take more risk tend to get more reward. This is true. Nowhere in this life is it not true. Many of the people that have built the biggest businesses in our day and age are not people that were handed the business, not people that were handed a bunch of money. They were people that bet on themselves even though risk was present. Increasing your capacity for risk requires exposing yourself to difficult times and proving to yourself that you can make it through. Let me say that again. Increasing your capacity for risk requires exposing yourself to difficult times and proving to yourself that you can make it through. Every time you expose yourself to a more and more difficult situation, you build more and more confidence in yourself to be able to do literally anything. We've been talking about this. When you put yourself in the ice bath and you're like, oh, damn, this is so uncomfortable. And I can't breathe here in the beginning. But I breathe and I breathe and I breathe and I breathe right through the discomfort. And then I step out and I recognize how amazing I feel from putting myself in that uncomfortable situation. We have to become more and more resilient. And the only way we become more and more resilient is getting really uncomfortable. I can't remember who said this. It might have been Tim Ferriss. But he said that your level of success in life directly correlates to the number of difficult conversations you have. Think about your relationship situation. Think about your work situation. Think about any situation that you're in life. And think about the way in which you tend to tolerate things, you let things slide, and then your relationship never changes. It never improves. Or your position in work never improves. Because, well, I was really frustrated about this, but I just couldn't build up the courage to actually have the conversation. And think about when you do have the difficult conversation and it blows up in your face. Well, that one time it blew up in your face is now what you are associating with all difficult conversations. But the truth is, a lot of the time on the other end of a difficult conversation is a lot of freedom. And I know it's true for me. I know it's true for my family. I know it's true for so many people around me. And it's so true for my business. It's been crucial for business. It's been crucial for leadership. The difficult conversations that I have had that I prefaced with, well, this person's no longer going to like me anymore. They're not going to respect me, but have actually turned into something much more fruitful I can't put a number on it. Like the amount of times it has actually turned out to be something more beneficial on the other end compared to the times that it hasn't, they don't even compare. But I had to put myself in difficult situations and have difficult conversations based on my risk analysis. And the risk analysis was, what if I don't say anything? Well, there's a huge risk around that. And so I need to say something that's going to be uncomfortable, and I'm going to have that difficult conversation, and I'm going to get to the other side, and I am going to be better for it. The people around me are going to be better for it. And it's all about risk. Risk is always going to exist. And you can either stay frozen in your life based on your risk analysis, or you can become risk tolerant. And you can tolerate the difficult times, the uncomfortable situations, and you can recognize that you have far grander abilities than you ever could imagine. I want to leave you with this one line. You've made it through 100% of your difficult days to date. If you're listening to this podcast, if you're listening to this YouTube, watching this YouTube rather, you have made it through 100% of your difficult days to this date. So don't stop now, and don't forget that. That's it for today. I hope you guys all enjoyed my rant on risk analysis, the world that we're living in, and something that I think we need to start teaching more and more to our younger generations, but probably to all age groups. You have to be able to analyze risk, but you also have to be able to trust in yourself and be confident in yourself. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of the Cured Collective podcast. We will catch you on the next episode.